Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of Atlantik-Brücke, dear friends and partners of the FMC and Congressional Studies Group in Germany, welcome to our first edition of our joint virtual Battleground Tour. This is a new format initiated and conducted in cooperation between Atlantik-Brücke, Germany's leading platform for transatlantic dialogue, and the former members of Congress, FMC. My name is David Deisner. I'm the Executive Director of Atlantik-Brücke. The aim of this series is to provide a transatlantic platform for discussion, in particular to give Europeans a better understanding of the political situation in the run-up to the US elections, which are only a few weeks ahead of us. We want to focus on those regions that are of particular importance for the outcome of the election. What was planned as a delegation trip of high-ranking German politicians and business representatives will now be a digital trip across the swing states of the United States. The majority of our participants are here logged in digitally today. Some of our members are here in our office in Berlin, so that is what is commonly called now a hybrid event. The election campaign has just taken a special turn in the last few days. What do we know about the perception of the electorate? What do the polls tell us? This is what we want to talk about today. And I'm very grateful that we have a great group of distinguished and most knowledgeable speakers here with us today who will be introduced in more detail in just a second. I'm particularly grateful, not only, of course, to our members, our friends and partners at FMC, but to Congresswoman Elizabeth Atsey, from Connecticut for taking over the moderation today. Congresswoman, and with that, we'd like to hand over to you. Thank you so much for joining us and for moderating today.
Well, thank you so much, David, and thank you to all of the great folks at Atlantik-Brücke and to the former members of Congress Association for organizing this. We are very fortunate today to have really, truly the A-team of folks. You're going to be hearing from Glen Bolger, from Celinda Lake, Amy Welter, and Fred Yang. I have the pleasure of knowing 3 of the 4 and looking forward to getting to know Glen better. As David said, this is going to be a virtual tour, 6 battleground states. We have Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And obviously, you know, while we're on this call, more things may happen because this is the year in which from hour to hour, we never know how things are going to change. I want to let you know you can use the chat function to queue up questions. And for those who are live with David in Germany, you will also have an opportunity to ask questions that way. I'm going to not do, unlike Washington, not do long introductions. These are incredibly distinguished people. You can read their bios. But I want to get right into it. We're going to try to be fast with our discussion and opening remarks, move into questions, and then by about 9:25 US time, move into audience questions, if that's okay with everyone. So to start with, I want to ask each one of our guests here in just a minute or two, because I think it's really important for our German colleagues. What has changed in polling? Because I think I have a son who's actually in polling as well. Things have changed, and I think that's one of the things people don't understand. Number one, is polling predictive, or is it a snapshot in this year that's so crazy? What does that mean? What's changed between 2016 and 2020? So why don't we start with that and setting the table, because I think that's really important. We're going to go by alpha order to start. So Glen, kick it off to you to get us going.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And it's a pleasure to be here. If I can't be with you, at least I can be with you virtually. And in terms of what's changed in polling, everybody looks at 2016 and says, wow, polling really failed. It was wrong. How do we know we can trust these numbers? Well, a couple of observations. Number one is the polling didn't fail in 2016. In the national surveys, they had Hillary Clinton ahead by about an average of 3 points. She won by close to that margin. But what it didn't take into account, the national polling, was the Electoral College. And I'm sure that everybody joining us from Germany is well aware now of what the Electoral College is. And you know, that what news organizations have said is they need to do more swing state polling. And I think you're seeing that, maybe not quite as much. But look, the other challenge is it's I think facing the Republicans, which is my political party, is that it's a much bigger deficit for Trump this year than it was 4 years ago. I don't know that, if you're down by anywhere from 8 to 14 points, that you can make it up in the Electoral College. So it's a very challenging year. You probably can't tell, but for Fred and Celinda, they're actually giddy right now. I mean, look at their expressions. See how joyful they are? But that's because they know things are going very well for their party and not well for my party at all.
All right, Celinda, that takes us to you.
Glenn, if you think this is giddy, you don't know me very well. I think three things have changed in polling. And I agree with Glenn that the private polling in particular was more accurate. But there are three things that have changed. One, there was an education gap in 2016, and I think we're all much more sensitive to the fact of college-educated people being more likely to take our surveys than non-college educated people. And people are much, much more clear about dealing with that one way or the other, waiting, setting quotas, however. And we see the same kind of education gap this time. So that the importance of being aware of that. The second thing I think is that turnout is very important. And frankly, it could be even more important this year. And one of the things that's happening is there's not as much attention being paid to the surge in registration of white non-college people as probably should be. So the turnout model, who really turns out whose vote gets counted, is going to be very, very important. And I think all of the pollsters are planning a number of scenarios in that regard. And then the third thing I'd say is we continue, all of us, to be aware of cell phones, combination methodologies, online, landline, and cell phone. One of the things that's an ironic derivative of COVID is that people this year have been much easier to reach because lots more people are picking up the phone to talk to us since they're all sitting together at home.
All right, that is great. Amy, on to you.
I want to thank Fred Yang for ensuring that the W doesn't have to go last. So thanks, Fred. This never happens to me. So glad to be with you all. And really you all, I hope, can appreciate that you have three of the best pollsters in America coming to speak to you 30 days out from an election. So this is quite remarkable. That's why I'm here. I want to listen to them. But I think there are a couple of things that I would point to as differences between now and 2016, beyond just the technical pieces that my pollster friends are pointing out. Some of it too is perception. And I think one thing we all learned, those of us who follow politics and people who do so for a living or people who just like to be engaged in politics, I think learned about probability from the 2016 election. And, they looked at these models that told them, in the New York Times and others, that told them there was 70, 80, 69, whatever % chance that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And that translated in their head automatically to 100%. I mean, anything over 50 means it's going to happen. And rather than focusing in on the fact that if it's not 100%, there is a chance that the other thing could happen. And while models are still out there putting the percentage chances forward, I don't think they're getting quite the attention that they did. In fact, the big disconnect right now in the public is the seemingly lack of trust in what the polls are showing, that while overwhelmingly the polls put Trump at a disadvantage, more voters are saying that they think that Trump ultimately will win than that Biden will win. And I think that goes to the reality of what 2016 was, which was whenever something happens for the very first time, you are very reticent to think it could happen. And then once it does happen, you think, well, of course, it happened once, it can happen again. And so I think this will be a very important sort of test for polling to sort of win back the trust of voters and of the public. The other piece that is very different, or a couple of pieces that are very different from 2016, as Glenn pointed out, the gap is much bigger. At no point did you see, well, maybe that's not fair. Let me put it this way, the stability of this race is also very different, that there hasn't been a point at which Joe Biden has ever been behind in this race. And if you look even at the polling going all the way back to January, Joe Biden has been ahead by a much bigger percent than Hillary Clinton was, anywhere from 4 to 6 to 10, and now, as Glenn pointed out, 8 to 14 seems to be the range. There are fewer undecided voters this time around than there were in 2016. Fewer sort of conflicted voters saying, well, gosh, I hate both of them. What should I do? This time around, voters are making pretty clear that they are settled in on their candidate and they're not budging. And there is not a third party drain from the two major parties like there was in 2016. There is an independent candidate, libertarian candidate. She is not getting as much attention as, say, the third party candidates in 2016 got. And you can see in the data that almost all of the vote right now is between the two candidates, Trump and Biden. And one last thing to remember about that not only did President Trump fail to win a majority of the popular vote, he took 46% there, but in 6 to 7 states, he also won by just a plurality. He did not hit a majority of the vote. And so if you have fewer undecided voters, a bigger gap in the national polling, and no third party drain, it's really challenging then for the president to win without getting 50% in these battleground states. And thus far, in all the polling, we have seen him sort of tapped out or capped out close to where he was in 2016.
And that is why Amy is asked to do this, because a number of my questions, Amy's directly touched on about the undecideds being very different. And I think that is really important for people to understand how different that is than where we were 4 years ago. And now to Fred, which I have to confess, Fred was my pollster. So I know Fred really well, and I know him to be excellent, but I know Celinda to be excellent, and Glenn as well. Again, you have the A-team and Amy's observations right on point. Fred?
Well, I'm glad, Congresswoman, you let everyone know that I had worked for you, because I will explain the extra bit of hostility she has toward me. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So one of the great things about coming last, and I've always, the Amy Walters of the world through elementary school, Amy, have always said, hey, thank goodness for you. But is, especially with smart people like Celinda, Glenn, and Amy, everything that can and should be said has been said. So I'll just sort of say a couple things. I actually think, as Glenn said, polling and pollsters is getting better every cycle. We learn every cycle from the current cycle, and I think I even after 2016, when I think we were all in a daze, some of us in a giddy daze. But I remember on election night in 2016, I was up at NBC and I was on the Lawrence O'Donnell show at 2 a.m. Wednesday morning, and the first question was, is polling dead? I'm proud of our profession. I think all of us, Democrats, Republicans, do it very well. And I think each cycle we get better. I do think, Congresswoman and everyone, what's changed about polling is the plethora of polls. And I agree with Glenn again, that part of the problem in 2016 was there were not enough public polls in battleground states. But Celinda and Glenn, you're old enough like me. Amy's still a kid. When we first started in this business in the 80s, there were very few polls in general. And now I think maybe part of the problem is there are too many polls. Honestly, some of the polls of varying quality, but also the reporting on the polls has gotten different, where Amy's nodding her head. Some of the legends in our businesses, the David Broders of the world, the Margaret Carlsons, they would, because there weren't a lot of polls back then, they would write long think pieces about not just who was ahead and who was behind, but why. And I think part of what's gotten lost with the number of polls in the news cycle is the focus more and more is on the horse race. And as I know, Celinda, Glenn, and you, Congresswoman, would know from your polls, the horse race is often the lagging indicator, and the value of the poll is not who's ahead, who's behind. It's sort of the dynamics of the race. And so I think, again, I'm not an apologist for our industry. I think all of us do it very well. And I think, part of the issue is that, we're in a culture now where, okay, well, you said the race was 1 point and it was 3 points. You were wrong. Or as Glenn and Celinda and Amy have noticed, and people tell me this all the time. I'm sure they do it to Glenn and Celinda in particular. Why were the polls wrong? Trump won, and you go, no, the polls weren't wrong. She won the popular vote. We just don't count them. We don't elect presidents that way. So it's even smart people have this disconnect. Trump won. Polls said Hillary was going to win. Ergo, polls are wrong. But again, not to be defensive, we can always learn, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot of lessons from 2020. But I feel like for all of you in Germany, I think the polls you read, the Post, Wall Street Journal, the news organizations, you should have confidence that if not telling you who's ahead or who's behind, they're at least going to give you good answers on the broader dynamics in American politics that often shape who's going to win.
Great. Well, that is a great startup. I think people are curious about the debate, what your read is. I was looking at the New York Times quick polls this morning suggesting actually that it might have had more impact than one might have expected at least in 2 of the battleground states, in Florida and Pennsylvania. The general theory is that debates don't really matter. And so let's do this fairly rapidly, and we'll go maybe in reverse order this time. Do we think this debate matters, which may be the only one, right? This may be the only one we see between at least the presidential contenders. And, if it matters, if so, why? If not, why not? Fred, we'll start with you. We'll go back to the order.
You mean the debate 6
yes,
days ago?
it was so last. I know. So last.
Wait, what debate? So I think the debate mattered until it didn't, which is when the president got his coronavirus diagnosis. So look, I think for our friends and colleagues overseas, it may seem very scattered to you. It is for us. It's like almost you either don't want to go to bed at night or you don't want to wake up. So to be serious, Congresswoman, no, I think that the debate caused President Trump needs a lot of breaks. And I thought his debate performance and also the reaction made him take a step backward. But then I think what happened on Thursday, Friday, and the weekend has sort of upended all of that. So it may have mattered. I'm not sure how much it matters now.
Amy?
Yeah, I agree with Fred that every day that the president is behind, which and has been pretty consistent through the summer, is a day that he's wasting not being on offense. And so he needs to change the trajectory and the narrative of this race, which is what that debate was going to be, his last best chance to do so. And I agree with Fred that it actually made it worse. Now, I think the COVID diagnosis does sort of upend many things. At the same time, what we've noticed throughout this cycle, forget the cycle. Let's start in January with the number of things that have happened, from impeachment to COVID to the George Floyd killing and protests, the tell-all books, the debate, the COVID. It's been like literally earth-shaking events happening every week, and yet opinions about the president do not move. And I think people's opinions of this president kind of settled in long ago. And nothing that's happening now is changing that. What the president really needs is not that opinions of him change, because I don't think they are, but opinions of Joe Biden were going to change, and that Joe Biden was going to be proven to be inept, sleepy, socialist, all of those things. And that just hasn't happened. The NBC Wall Street Journal poll that came out this weekend put Joe Biden's favorable ratings he's at +2. It's not great. It's not like people adore Joe Biden. He's the most popular person to ever run for president, but he's a lot more popular than Hillary Clinton was at this point, certainly in a better place than where Trump is. And it's pretty clear from the way not just Trump is running his campaign, but the way that all Republicans up and down the ballot are running the campaign is that they really, really, really wanted Bernie Sanders to be the nominee. And I think it would have been a clearer contrast. It would have been an easier contrast between Democratic socialist and Donald Trump and Republican socialist. It's not a believable attack on Joe Biden. Joe Biden's many things, but to make him some sort of crazy, wild-eyed, socialist-loving wacko is just not, it's not really getting anywhere. And so to me, there's still so much of this is dependent on Joe Biden not messing up more than Donald Trump changing opinions or something else changing opinions of him.
Great. Celinda?
I think three things. It's important to remember that out of that chaos, the voters did conclude that Joe Biden won the debate. And so that that just underscores what Amy said. And people did think he showed strength, which was a very important criteria. I think it revealed a great contrast in leadership. And in the end, I think this race is coming down to two variables that interact. One, COVID and leadership, and two, the economy. I think that there were 2 points in the debate that really hurt the president. His defense, kind of inexplicable defense of white supremacists, is an ongoing, people don't believe that Joe Biden is a radical. They don't believe that at all. But they do believe that Donald Trump is too close to white supremacists and puts fuel on the fire, uses division as a political tactic. And then the third thing I think that is more subtle, but in some ways the most important, at a seminal moment, of course, Donald Trump issued his ongoing attack about Joe Biden and said, you're wearing a really big mask and all this stuff. Well, current events turned that on its head and proved who's right. And I think that will be a pivot point in the end of a place where a lot of seniors and a lot of women just were done with Trump.
Glenn?
Thank you. Let me start by saying I thought that debate was the worst single thing I've seen in my 35 years in politics. I turned it off after 65 minutes. The only reason I hung around that long is because theoretically that impacts my job. And as Amy pointed out, Biden was seen in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll as winning the debate 49-24. 17% said neither were good. So I think 17% are honest. But I don't think Trump helped himself at all. I think the data shows that. What's interesting is when you look back at past debate trends, in 2016, Hillary was seen as winning the debate by better than 2-1. Mitt Romney actually had a 3-point advantage over Barack Obama in 2012 in terms of the debate. John Kerry won it 2-1. George W. Bush was seen in 2000 as beating Al Gore relatively close, and that one actually fit. So I'm not sure that by the time November rolls around, of course, a lot of people are voting already, that the debate's going to have that big an impact. I think ultimately the biggest impact on the election is coronavirus and how people feel about Trump's handling of it. And that's why he's behind.
That is great. We're going to go to questions in a minute, so let's get ready for that. The last thing I want to flag and have you all touch on is, I think, really important for our friends in Germany, which is the intersection with the Senate on this. I was looking back at the battleground states and saying, gee, it's kind of crazy. Actually, Ohio is legitimately back on the battleground list, which it was not as of about a month and a half ago. But I was thinking about the fact how bad it is, Glenn, for the GOP when you take into account the Senate races. Because of those battleground states, Arizona is likely to flip the other way, highly likely. And Florida is in play in part because you've got 2 Senate seats up. And I think looking at Georgia and the fact that Georgia may not be decided until January 5th for a runoff is really crazy if you want to talk about the uncertainty and how this plays and how the Senate tries to run races alongside the president. If someone wants to tackle that intersection, because again, increasingly Senate races and states have gone the same way for the president as they do for the Senate. Well, that's pretty dangerous for the GOP this time, because if they go the same way, some of those Senate races are going down, and that then makes the electoral math extremely hard for the president. So why don't we talk about that the Senate interplay on, especially on these battleground states. We'll change it up. We will start with Celinda.
Thank you. Well, I think that, first of all, a lot of the Senate battleground states are not presidential battleground states. So we're going to be winning Senate seats, and actually they're moving fairly independently. Like Mark Kelly's had a very substantial lead over McSally from the get-go, and Arizona, while Vice President Biden is in the lead, is still very, very competitive. And it's certainly not true that Montana is competitive presidentially, but you have Steve Bullock slightly ahead of Daines in the Senate race. I think that there are 3 things going on. I think, first of all, the Democrats are the beneficiary of tremendous recruitment. We were just extraordinary in the kinds of candidates that we were able to get to win. I think, secondly, this presidential has energized the Democratic base. And so you are going to see the Democratic base really strong. And then many of these Senate campaigns are also battling out the COVID analysis, the COVID contrast. And because of the reckless behavior of the White House, you have several senators either quarantined or with COVID, including some candidates. So I think in the end that the general atmospherics have really benefited the Democratic candidates, but it's a very different dynamic in some of these states from the presidential. These candidates are going to win in part because of the extraordinary people they are.
Well, that totally makes sense. Fred, why don't you go?
I want to be very careful what I say here, because when we do this again in 2 years under a Biden presidency, I guess there's something Congresswoman and everyone called karma. So look, I think I don't think necessarily that every single Senate race in America is tied to the presidential race. There's some, like Celinda said, President Trump is very likely to win Montana, but Governor Bullock has a very good chance to win that state. So there only have been a couple states where Senate candidates have won when the opposite party has won the presidency. So I do think it is rare. So look, I think the Trump dynamics, and again, Celinda and I and you went through this as Democrats in 2014 and 2010. When there's a wind in your face, it's very hard to withstand it. But been trying to be as unbiased as possible. We have very good candidates. Republicans have a lot of money and good candidates. And the question's going to be not that they would ever give up on the presidency, but when do they turn their attention to sort of helping some of these vulnerable incumbents, either for Senate or Congress, win? And again, I think everyone, broad dynamics like COVID, and it's kind of insulting to COVID to call it a broad dynamic. It is historic. So our historic issue like COVID can sort of wipe away sort of mundane things like money. But I do think in some of these states that look tough for the Republican incumbents, There's 4 weeks left. A lot of we were in a similar place as Democrats 2 years ago, and again there was a blue wave, but the blue wave didn't sort of inundate every part of America. There are still some parts of America in the red states where Republicans were able to hang on, and we may see that same dynamic in 2020.
Glenn, what's your perspective on this?
I think that America has become much more of a parliamentary voting system, where instead of splitting your ticket, voting for president of one party, senator from another because they've been doing a good job, we now vote for uniforms. We vote for either the red uniform or the blue uniform, and I think that makes it very challenging for Republicans to hold on to the Senate. It's one of those things where somebody alluded to, and sorry, I've got beleaguered candidates texting me and trying to say, get on a call right now. So I'm trying to maintain both. Is there a point at which the Republicans say it's, time to, cut the line with Trump and focus on trying to save the Senate? In 1996, Dole had no chance against Bill Clinton in his reelection, and the party went to a don't give Bill Clinton a blank check. Now, one thing is that America had seen Bill Clinton with a blank check in 93 and 94, and that's when they put in a Republican Congress. The challenge we've got is they haven't seen Joe Biden with a blank check, and Joe Biden, as Amy pointed out, is not scary. He's not Bernie Sanders. He's not Elizabeth Warren. He's not Hillary Clinton. So I think that blank check message would be a tougher sell this time around, and partly because we are such a parliamentary voting system in a way. So it's for my party, it's a tough go of things. I think one thing that I should take away from this is I tend to speak my mind and get in trouble for doing that in politics a lot of times, that I may have to turn down any other speaking opportunity between now and November 3rd, because it's just not good.
Exactly. Amy, you want to bring this home, and then we'll see if we've got some questions.
Yeah. Two things I want to point out, and as Glenn said, we're turning into much more of a parliamentary system, and what has also changed is the fundraising process, which, for years it started as sort of big donors writing big checks. You had a soft money boom where it was the party that was giving out the money, and so the party got to decide who their candidate was and to fund the ones they liked and not fund the ones they don't like. And now with online fundraising, what you're seeing is the small d democratization of fundraising. And what it means, though, is it's not necessarily going strategically to the races that are the most competitive. Now, to be clear, I think a lot of donors, even small dollar donors, are paying so much attention to politics that they know just as well as any political strategist which are the top 4 Senate races in the country. But when you see the amount of money that's pouring into places like South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, on paper, a race in South Carolina shouldn't be competitive, but the money started flowing in, one, because the Democratic candidate is incredibly impressive, but the other is just the deep disdain that the Democratic voters have for Lindsey Graham. And so what you're seeing now, like, for example, the amount of money that's going to South Carolina, that's going to Kentucky, right? In a race that's really tough, beating Mitch McConnell. I know it is the holy grail for Democrats, but that is a tough state. And that's a lot of money that's sitting in Kentucky that's not going to flip a seat. While in Texas, it's a tough race and it's expensive, but that candidate's not getting that kind of fundraising, in part because she's not up against a villain in the way that some other Democrats are. And so, it's been fascinating to watch that, but it has allowed challengers, Democrats, first-time candidates who in any previous year would have been lucky to have raised $1,000 are now outraising longtime sitting incumbents. And that is really, I just think we have to really appreciate the game-changing nature of that. And it also, though, and the implication, of course, is it takes things out of the hands of the traditional donor class and of the traditional political class. And that's, you know, something I'll be very curious to see if this pipeline, where this pipeline goes and how full it is in a non-Trump era. Trump is driving all of this. Are they as excited in 2022 to defend all of these people, to put money into races that are not quite as sexy? I don't know. We'll see.
Great, Amy. I'm glad actually you mentioned the dollar factor, because I think that is something that is very hard to understand outside the United States, the amount of money seen. And seeing John Ossoff back in again is demonstrative of that in Georgia. So we have a question from Joaquim here asking back to the debate, and to say, given how incredibly chaotic and I think widely viewed as embarrassing, not informative, or worse, appalling, what do people think that is going to say about format, continuation? I guess, you know, I think it sounds like moderators are planning to continue sort of the same format, probably actually can't really cut off a mic. What do folks think about whether, and again, COVID may override all of this, so nothing may happen because of that, but hey, we still got the vice presidential coming up. And I think that my guess is at least that one will happen. And maybe we should even talk about that for a minute, because now with the president 74 sick and with multiple factors, Biden 77 having been exposed, this is one in which really the vice president's it is not beyond the realm of possibility, you know, with a 10% mortality of people in their age group, that you could have either or both candidates not be in a position to hold office. So this is a more serious vice presidential, I would say, on both sides than we've had in my lifetime, certainly. Anyone want to jump in on that?
Okay, I will.
Go for it.
Well, I'll kind of focus on the changing the rules for the presidential debate. First of all, if you look at the polls and you see how badly Trump is perceived to having performed in it, you would think that if there is another debate, maybe the third one, because I'd be shocked if the second one actually happens. But if there is another debate, you would think that he would look at that and say, oh my goodness, you know, I can't continue to do that. I have to follow the rules. But, you know, he does what he thinks works. He doesn't take advice from people. And I think that what they've talked about, which is cutting off the mics, that would have, you know, if it's not your time, your mic's cut off. And I think that that's the only real option to try and get a meaningful debate. Somebody else.
And then we're gonna go to David after this round in Berlin for questions from there.
I think that your point, Congresswoman, about the vice presidential debate is a really important one, because you're right, the attention now moving to Pence and Harris for all the reasons that you outlined, but also we know that this debate is just gonna look a lot different. I think the expectations are, given what we know about how Mike Pence operates, that this is not gonna be Mike Pence jumping in on Harris and, you know, attacking her, et cetera. And I think you're going to see, though, for the first time, an attempt to force Harris to answer a lot of the questions that really weren't addressed in the first debate on the sort of where is the ticket on some of the controversial things like getting rid of a filibuster and adding more seats to a Supreme Court. What do they do about healthcare, the economy, taxes, et cetera? And her fluency in answering these questions is going to be very important. And Pence has done this a lot. And I think he understands this arena pretty well. And so, look, we all have seen Senator Harris in front of the, on the dais, grilling folks in front of her committee. But this is a very different experience being in a nationally televised debate. So this, to me, there is the potential for a glimmer of good news for Republicans if they're able, once again, if the headline is not Mike Pence goes crazy and it is once again chaos, but it is, you know, prosecuting the case effectively and or Harris unable to make her case, that's a good day. Now, to everybody else's point here, how long does that last? And does it matter when we all know that Donald Trump will be the focus of attention every minute of every day going forward?
I want to get to Berlin in a second. Fred, do you have something quick or something quick?
I just think the four of us plus you, Congressman, we should have an over/under of how many times the president tweets during the vice presidential debate, and will that somehow be a bigger focus than the presidential debate, VP debate?
All right, actually, I'd like to take this over to Berlin. David, I think we've got a question or two there. You want to go ahead from your end?
Yeah, Congresswoman, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for sharing your expertise. I think that's really very interesting indeed. We do have a question here from a member of the German Parliament, Bundestag, Mr. Andrew Ullmann.
Hello, and thank you very much from here for the insights that you were presenting. I do have a question around polling right now, and I hope you hear me. Is that the acoustic okay? Wonderful. You know, after the president was diagnosed 3-4 days ago with COVID-19, how much are these polling still stable? How are they volatile to changes? And what does that mean for absentee ballots? Because when you see pictures of the president traveling with his car through DC and like a general who just survived COVID-19, might that switch the polling more in favor of the Republicans? Or do they say, well, he's behaving unresponsible and this could be just the opposite? What direction are we might be facing to that regard?
So thank you, Andrew. Celinda, since you did not get in on that last round, let's start with you.
Well, stop me if I'm not answering your question because I want to make sure that I understood it. But I think that, first of all, many more people are going to vote by mail. That experience is going to differ a lot by state because there are people in states like Arizona that have, and Colorado that have great familiarity with vote by mail. And there are people in states like Pennsylvania where the system, and Wisconsin where the system is very convoluted and a lot of people don't have experience. So what the campaign is focusing on right now, the Biden campaign is focusing right now, is making sure that people know they have choices and making sure that people vote early. And then the second piece, I think, and the back end is going to be making sure that people's votes are counted. And we could have a record number of ballots disqualified. And that's something that the Democrats are going to fight very hard. So first things first, let's get voted early. And the campaign, the DNC and a lot of the state campaigns are issuing a record amount of information, just instructional videos, kind of like, you know, the food, inspired by the Food Network, about if you can learn how to make a cake in a video, then maybe you can learn how to cast a absentee ballot in a video as well.
Fred, and again, I think probably none of us know it's so volatile, but do we think this moves undecided or changes? More to the point, is it going to change decided? We know that Trump cleaned up with late breaking undecided 4 years ago. We know that category is much smaller. So I guess to be more precise, do we think this changes the dynamic so that a higher percentage of the undecided would break towards Trump because of this? And would it actually change anyone's preference? I mean, you can only vote once, no matter how strongly you feel. You still only get one vote, which is sometimes not reflected in social media or media reports.
I think that's a great question, sir. I think it's a great question. It's something obviously that all of us are struggling with. I think the short answer is I don't think it'll have any impact, sir. I think if you were pro-Trump, you're pro-Trump. I think if you're anti-Trump, you'll stay anti-Trump. One of the things I wanted to sort of bring up, piggybacking on Amy Walter's initial discussion of how things have stayed stable. Before this call, I looked at realclearpolitics.com. They aggregate the national polls. So on March 9th, which was Monday, before the Friday shutdown, Joe Biden, the poll of national polls, all the national polls up to that point, Joe Biden had 50.6% of the vote. Donald Trump had 44.1. I looked it up this morning. So October 5th, 6.5 months later, COVID, racial protests, debates, Olympics canceled, Cam Newton, a famous American football player, getting COVID. Okay, a lot of things happening. Joe Biden's vote is 50.6. Donald Trump's vote is 42.5. In other words, in the space of 6.5 months, Joe Biden's vote, not just to the tens places, but to the decimal places, is exactly the same. Look, I always thought, to your question, sir, that President Trump was going to have a hard time winning re-election before COVID struck. And there's nothing that's told me COVID, racial protests, debate, the president getting COVID, that tells me that any of those occurrences are helpful to the president and that it's going to help him win re-election. I think, and I know Glenn, Amy, and Celinda, and the Congresswoman SD, I'm not like this, and I'm sure I'll regret it, but I'm hungry. I think the cake is baked against President.
Amy?
Yeah, I would love to direct a question also to Celinda, who raised this in her opening about the question about registration and turnout, what we do and what we don't know, and how these folks are designing their surveys to get that. Because I think before we hit COVID and everything else that's happened, the theory of the case for Republicans, especially for Trump, was that he could still win a race without winning the popular vote. Once again, not broadening his coalition, but deepening it, finding those voters who demographically look like Trump voters in those battleground states, getting them registered, getting them excited, turning them out at such a historic rate that no matter what was happening, no matter how poorly he looked to be doing in the national polls, he could still win an electoral college victory in those states. And obviously the polling suggests not only nationally is he struggling, but in those 3 states in particular, he's losing by a bigger margin than he was losing at this point in 2016. And that the lead that Biden has in those states looks pretty steady. But I think the question that I have is, one, how convinced are we that these polls are taking into their modeling the possibility that there are new voters out there, either new registrants or people who hadn't been engaged before, and 2, the enthusiasm factor. So I think a big part of the reason you're seeing Trump, as you pointed out, sort of waving like a general, is not to win over undecided voters, but to ensure that voters who right now are Trump supporters aren't like, oh my God, this is terrible. Why should I even bother showing up? The guy might not even make it, right? And I also think the other piece to help maybe juice enthusiasm at the end is pushing through the Supreme Court nomination. Will that be enough? I don't know, but I would love to hear from Celinda about the thing she put about the new registrants and what that could tell us.
Can I add one more thing to that, which is depressing the turnout on the other side? I mean, one way to win is to goose your turnout. which Trump did remarkably, and Amy's talking about deepening, finding still yet other unidentified, and obviously people who have come of age. I mean, that will help Trump, we know, among men for sure. But if you can't win with voters, get them to stay home. And I have to say, I wondered during the debate with Trump's performance, if he concluded the quote, housewives of America were not going to vote for him, maybe he could discuss them and make them stay home. Because I know from Fred's polling for me and my own gut, women tend to disengage when it gets incredibly unpleasant. And yeah, I think it is not a crazy strategy for the president to conclude, I'm not going to have college educated women in the suburbs vote for me. I don't want them to vote at all. And one way to do that is to just make it intolerable. I think that's a strategy personally. I haven't seen anyone write that as a strategy, but I think that is, it works. If the voters for Biden don't vote, they don't vote, right? It means he's deprived of votes. So anyway, Celinda, that was directed to you, and then we'll go to Glenn and Fred on those points.
Yeah, so I have a great deal of respect for the Republican turnout programs. And I think that Amy noted one thing, which is the Supreme Court piece. Although interestingly, for the first time in the data, we see Democrats more motivated on the Supreme Court than Republicans. And that's a very unusual pattern. And I don't know if it's real or just survey effects. You also have some very, very creative programs like Kellyanne Conway, and no one's given her credit for this, launching the trailer park program to register in record numbers and then turn out people in trailer parks who are very pro-Trump and very easy to identify. So I have a great, and then frankly, if we had God telling our people to vote, we'd have higher turnout too. So every Wednesday and every Sunday, they have God telling a bunch of their people to vote, at least in their minds. So I have a lot of respect for the Republican turnout efforts and the Trump turnout efforts, and I don't underestimate that at all. And many of the battleground states are closer than the national numbers are. I think the point that was made in the very beginning that we need we need to have more battleground state polling and better battleground state polling. The national polling was pretty accurate in 2016. Some of the battleground polls were not. That said, however, for your theory, Congresswoman, I think it's a very interesting one. Trump is pretty motivating. One of the things that we saw in the 2016 race was the real collapse or the reduction in margin for Hillary Clinton among white college-educated women. That is going to be impossible now. They are so energized and so upset. And the chaos that Donald Trump produces is now sitting at their kitchen tables with schools closed and jobs lost and jobs at home and risk of COVID and endangering their families and not being able to see their mother-in-law that they may be taking care of, or their own mother not being able to see their grandkids. So this chaos has come home to really sit next to them in their day-to-day lives. That said, I think what's really, really important here is that Joe Biden, the most important information is not the negative about Donald Trump, because as many people have said, that's kind of baked in. The most important thing in the last few days is to fill in the picture of Joe Biden. What exactly will he do as president? What is his style of leadership? How will he get things done? What's his vision for the future? And I think that's a very strong message for us in the last 28 days.
Glenn?
I think we're headed towards record turnout since women got the right to vote in 1920. I think that if it's not record turnout in terms of not total numbers, obviously it would be the highest total numbers ever, but also the highest percentage of eligible voters ever. People are fired up on both sides to vote. The challenge is Republican or independents are voting Democratic this time. When anybody says, oh, this is a base election, they're lying. They don't know what, well, I shouldn't say they're lying. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. Let's go with that. Because you look at 2010, you look at 1994, you look at 2014, independents voted overwhelmingly Republican. In 2018 And in 2008 and 2006, independents voted overwhelmingly Democratic. Right now, they're voting Democratic. So I think we're going to see record turnout, and we're going to see independents push the Democrats over the top. There's more Democrats right now than there are Republicans in the country. The only way Republicans can win is by winning a majority of independents. We're not doing it. It's not happening. So I think, and look, by the way, look at 2018. It was a record turnout for midterm elections going back to 1914, which again was before women got the right to vote. So if I'm wrong, by the way, and it's not a record turnout, I'm going to blame coronavirus. It's not my fault. I was right. Coronavirus, kept me from being right.
I am getting hand signals and chats that we are at a hard end here. I wanted to thank all of you. Again, you can see why this was the A team. They are terrific. Your insights were tremendously valuable and useful. And obviously we're now at a critical point prior to the election. And I know you all have many other things to do. So we're grateful for your help. And David, I'd like to give you a chance to wrap things up. And again, thank you all. Thank you to the former members of Congress and to our wonderful partners at Atlantik-Brücke for their support, and to our great panelists. You were all terrific and very insightful. David, a couple of words?
Well, Congresswoman, just thank you so much. A brief word of gratitude. That was incredibly helpful and very interesting indeed. And certainly we covered a lot of ground. Thank you so much to all of you. It was a great honor to have you. And you really helped us to get our head around all the things that we see here. And it's sometimes hard to understand and hard to get our head around. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise. That was great.
Thank you. And thank you, Congresswoman, for great moderating.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you all very much, and stay tuned. This is the first of 5 parts for our partnership. Thank you all very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.